Friends, the Charlie Kirk Show team here. America's debt bomb has blown past $37 trillion, and it's climbing every second. President Trump is fighting for fair trade and strong borders to slow the train wreck, but the numbers don't lie. When debt grows this fast, it can threaten your savings and your family's future. That's why more Americans are turning to real assets like gold and silver. I work with and recommend Preserve Gold. They make it simple to own physical gold and silver, even inside your retirement accounts like an IRA or 401k. Text USA to 50505 for their free wealth protection guide. With a qualified purchase, you could get up to $20,000 in free gold or silver. You are a contrarian thinker on a lot of topics, I think, and you always make it interesting, whether that's daylight savings time or, in this case, property taxes. And you and Blake, I think, are of the same mind here. What is your take on this push in Florida to eliminate property taxes?
Yeah, first of all, just thank you guys for having me. My first time joining the program since Charlie's passing. I just want to commend you both for the job that you guys are doing. And I'm very, very sorry that Charlie and I never got to have the fight about daylight savings time that we were once promised. So RIP Charlie, we will one day be able to have that. But on property tax in general, there's been a new push by Governor DeSantis. This is picking up on quite a few red states, Governor Abbott and others in Texas, pushing explicitly to either abolish property tax or, in a more objectionable case, in my opinion, specifically carve out property tax exemptions for older homeowners. And something that I'm really passionate about is defending the very idea of property tax very specifically, while also being able to critique individual school districts, because I believe that it's very important to preserve the local connection of the taxpayer to the community. And one of my more recent objections right now specifically is that it actually centralizes control of education, of police, public services, and others at the state and the federal level. And if you really think back to the founding of our republic, property tax is in many ways the most American tax that exists. 14 out of the 15 colonies had property taxes by 1796. Thomas Jefferson actually believed that property tax was the most righteous tax that could exist here in the United States. And so I'm concerned more specifically at a very high level that this is largely a giveaway to the wealthy landowner class, which, yes, also disproportionately happens to be much older, and that it is not one that prioritizes younger families, turnover, and other healthy elements of a housing market, which remains, as you guys know, as Charlie knew as well, one of the central pain points for the burgeoning American family. And if we care about families, caring about housing, housing policy, school district funding is something that we all really need to think very deeply about. And I just think this goes in the wrong direction.
Yeah, so I just want to say we always invite response from our listeners, freedom@charliekirk.com. And I will say, the discussions we've had on this topic have been volcanic. We've gotten a ton of emails about it, and I'll be frank, they are mostly hostile to you and me, Sager. That a lot of people, and we got a lot of very authentic stories. People talking about how they had to work and save their entire lives to be able to their homes, or how they are there are seniors who are economically struggling right now, and they feel singled out, and it's really bad. And I don't want to downplay any of those things. And I want to emphasize, we are not engaging in generational warfare on the old. I am not advocating dispossess the old. We're not saying the old are villains, but what we have to recognize is if we're going to change our tax system to make American life more affordable, that's the goal of this. The goal is fighting for affordability. We have to think who benefits most and also who is actually hurting the most in America. And what Sagar, is Charlie talked about this all the time. The people who are in the most dire situation in America are the young. They feel like they have no path forward to what their parents and grandparents had access to. And as a result, they're becoming very radical on the left and on the right in many cases. And so I think it would be disastrous for us to pursue a tax policy of just abolishing property tax when it is almost certain that this will mean raising the tax burden that is paid by young working families, because the offset to this is almost inevitably going to be higher income taxes or higher sales taxes. It's like a balloon. You squeeze the balloon somewhere and it will expand elsewhere. And so we have to think, where is that balloon going to expand?
Right. Let me just back up. Let's talk about Florida specifically, right? So the Florida Policy Institute, estimates there's some 1.5 million Floridians who live in school districts where actually 50% of their funding, over 50% of that funding, comes specifically from the homestead property tax. That's about 5% of the Floridian population, but you have some $18.5 billion in shortfall that an exemption of homestead property tax would happen. Now, as Blake said, inevitably, especially in a state like Florida, where you have no income tax, the money is going to have to be made up from somewhere else. So that could impose like a tourist tax. If you guys have ever stayed in Florida, different rates for hotel rooms if you're a Florida resident. If you're not, and of course, it's not like the Disney vacation for a family member is already not exorbitantly expensive. But secondary to that is it will almost certainly have to be made up in some other form. Sales tax is usually the way that this goes about. And one of the reasons I'm really passionate about this is I grew up in the home state of Texas, and I think it's really important to say that one of the things I'm proud of is that so many Americans who live in unaffordable hellholes like where I am here in the DMV, where childcare is $150,000 a year on average, actually literally where I live, where the median home values are well over $1 million. I think that's disastrous. I think it's the most anti-family place in the world. The median home buyer around here is some 40 or 50 years old. I'm very proud people are moving to my home state of Texas to raise families for affordable housing. But what recently happened is what we took is that family dream, and instead we basically pass off the societal compact. We're all in this together. The silent generation paid property taxes for boomers whenever their children were going to school, and now by abdicating that responsibility and explicitly trying to take school taxes out of seniors and I understand, about the cost of living increase, et cetera, for Social Security not necessarily keeping up, but it is important to note that this idea about so-called fixed income is one that actually does apply across the entire income spectrum. Blake, I thought you made a really excellent point on the show earlier, where when a young person who lives anywhere and sees a 30 to 40% increase in their rental income, the median conservative argument to that is, well, I'm sorry, the free market has consequences and you're simply going to have to move. And, the point about the societal compact is when we also start to talk about Medicare and Social Security and the entitlement funding, which currently is being outflowed, being paid for by the younger generation, I just think it's important for that compact that we all explicitly pay into and support the system. And I don't think there's anything more important than supporting younger families right now who, as Blake said, ultimately tax policy is a zero-sum game. Like the funding does need to come from somewhere. And largely, the vast majority of Americans live in states right now where they have they have exemptions for older homeowners and increasingly pass the buck to the younger homeowner, the younger family who is having a lot of difficulty making ends meet right now. And that is my singular mission, if there is one, is to try and to advocate for policy, which will actually make it easier for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, I think everybody's heart is in the right place. We want more families. We want more marriages. We want to restore the social compact for Gen Z. My one pushback here is, and I want to, I was not aware that Thomas Jefferson said it was the most righteous of all the taxes.
One of the most righteous. Yeah.
One of them. Please explain why, if you know, why he said that, what his rationale was for that.
Sure.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, at the time of the colonies, it's very important to remember, and you guys discussed this as well, the idea of a general income tax or a capital gains tax or any of these other taxes was anathema. Really, a lot of it was alcohol taxes like a Pigouvian sin tax. It was tariffs, and it was property tax. Property owners were the only ones who could vote at that time. But very importantly, it was seen as a way, as the property owner themselves is benefiting from the social benefit of what it would pay for, let's say from the mail system to eventually evolved into cops, into schools. And that's why 14 out of the 15 colonies by 1796 had a property tax on the books. In fact, there used to be something called a general property tax, which we don't even have anymore. And so I really do understand how difficult it can be, when you look at your mortgage, and especially with the so-called reassessments of home values. And more importantly, people saying, I don't feel like I'm getting enough for my property tax. But my real message to you is you have the ability to change that on a level more than any other. I mean, if you live in the state of Florida, there's millions of people who live in the state of Florida, realistically your ability to campaign and to change policy at the state level is very low. And, issues that you guys have talked about here on the show, one reason why parents felt so much courage to come and speak up, let's say against critical race theory or transgenderism, was because, as taxpayers, we pay into this. We're directly funding it, and we have that access. And by removing that, you actually really do remove the social compact between the parent and the locality and the ability to influence turnover and ultimately to govern our own destiny, which is what local government really is all about. From our police force, from electing sheriff, like so much of this is actually baked deeply into the American spirit. And so long way to answer your question is it was about localism, and it was fundamentally about community, and it was seen as both a way to raise revenue, but also to turn people into good citizens and to recognize the ability for us to influence where those policies can, which direction they could go.
Well, I want to flag this only because we did get an email recently pointing this out from Heather in Florida, who says there are proposals where it would eliminate the ad valorem property tax except for school funding, which might be, I think it'd probably be a superior way, other than the fact that, obviously our public school funding is one of the most wasteful things we have.
So
but
I have another historical question for you, Sagar. I'm curious because we're talking about the landed gentry were the only ones that could vote back at America's founding. Was it just a property tax on like working farms and productive pieces of land that made a revenue, or was it actually a property tax on if you owned a home in a township somewhere?
So it was colony by colony, and it was also what Blake is saying is about the general property tax. So it wasn't just necessarily on that; it was also on the amount of stuff that you actually owned and its overall assessed value. But it was variable and different a little bit. And from some of the reading that I have done, I do think it's important though to address that point and to where we're talking about today, which is one of the reasons why I think this is really important is because the home ownership class largely is on the older side of the spectrum. And one of the things that I think all of us on this show are trying to get into is how can we make it so that younger families can afford homes. And so ultimately, when we have so many policy proposals, which largely are going to benefit some of the older Americans, which are, rapidly appreciated their own housing stock, which, if you look at their stock portfolios or overall wealth generation, we should also be looking perhaps at inverse proposals. Let's say, oh, well, if we're going to, let's say, give exemptions or others, then we need to look at where does it encourage, let's say, a first-time home buyer and others. And I think, unfortunately, like I said, in my home state of Texas, we're going in the opposite direction.
I love this tweet from you, Sagar. You go, property tax is the only issue aside from weed that I have received as much hate for. This is absolute confirmation I am over the target. I think that's been your experience too, Blake?
I mean, I want to be as charitable as possible because I know we have 350 million people in this country. Plenty of people have a lot of challenges, and we should always avoid any hateful warfare that stereotypes everyone as, all the same. And so it's easy to say like, oh, rich boomers living it up and wanting to go on cruises. I know a lot of people are not doing that. We're getting emails from them where they talk about how hard it is. But we have to avoid generational warfare the other way. And I always want to emphasize, if you're going to just abolish or radically cut property taxes or make special carve-outs, if you're not actually attacking government spending directly, that bill is going to be paid another way, and someone's going to pay that price. And that's attacking them just as much.
Yeah, well, and Sagar, I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to that, because I'm actually in favor of maybe some ideas where when somebody retires, and maybe it's means tested, maybe we freeze it at a certain rate or something like that. I want to throw a graphic up here just to kind of underscore the point that you guys are making, and this is from Fortune magazine, 159. It's the age distribution of home buyers and sellers by generation. So you see that weighted really high up at the old boomer, young boomer, and old Xer. Those are the three biggest. Meanwhile, millennials and Gen Zers are lagging far behind. And then there's also this. It's a visual, another one, 163. It shows that boomers make up 50% of the wealth in the country. And then you see those small little slivers of pies for millennials. And frankly, Gen Xers are lagging pretty far behind. Now, I understand boomers are a larger generation, but these are kind of the thoughts that we're exploring, and we're saying, hey, listen, let's give some for Gen Z, or we're going to have a dramatic political revolution in this country, and you're going to get Mamdaniism all over the place. So we got to find a solution. We got to find a solution. So how about this as a middle ground? If you retire at 65 and you're on fixed income, and it's based on your ability, your income level or whatever, your wealth level, you could freeze it at a certain level, because we are seeing dramatic spikes, maybe not currently this year, but especially after COVID, we saw property values shoot up. We saw reassessments shoot up the amount of property tax elderly on fixed income had to pay. Why can't we find some middle ground there? Or is that the wrong approach?
It's just a little tough, Andrew, because the presumption behind that is that the younger family can also simply just absorb that in there, where, you know, when we're talking about who actually does get automatic inflation-adjusted income, you know, if just to speak quite frankly, it's people who are on Social Security. People on Social Security get the automatic cost of living adjustment, including, by the way, they just got from the One Big Beautiful Bill, 88% of Social Security recipients will now also get it tax-free. So in terms of the amount of money, specifically state-directed money, what you're getting at is that those people actually have much better ability, because of their automatic inflation adjusted tax-free income, to absorb some of the shock that comes, while a younger family, you know, technically can go out there and make more money. But of course, it's very, very difficult in today's job market as well, especially if we look at the wages that track overall inflation, even including CPI inflation. In general, I'm not really for some stuff like that, because we've seen the way that it's played out, let's say, in the state of California, one of the most unaffordable housing markets on the planet, which of course has those frozen property tax rates from the time that people buy, which leads to highly variable problems in the amount that people are paying, very different neighborhoods depending on when you bought, and has explicitly been proven statistically to actually lock a lot of people in housing stock. And I know that that can sound a little bit dystopian, but the thing is what Blake and I are trying to say is, look, nobody is advocating for anybody being kicked out of a house, but we are accepting market realities where, yes, you know, with large assessment has also frankly quite largely increased your own personal wealth. And if we look at the history of the United States of America, and really at the family unit all across the world, you know, downsizing is just simply one of the facts of life. In many societies across the world, it actually would be viewed at, you know, extremely strange. This idea of, you know, living in large, not palatial home, but even a 3 or a 4 bedroom multi-generational housing is viewed much more, you know, as practical and a solution for avoiding having to put people in elderly homes. And that's simply, you know, part of an American characteristic. But more importantly, what I am trying to do beyond even the specifics that you're trying to lay out is, let's not go far in the point of the way that we did with entitlements, which has led to a lot of the way that we are right here. If we abolish property tax, well, we're not going to get rid of schools. We're not going to get rid of police. There has to be other funding vehicles. And especially in states like Florida and Texas, which pride themselves as pro-family states, that's going to have to probably come in the form of a highly regressive sales tax or some other tax, which is almost certain to hit the worker and the younger family member, as well as not increasing the amount of housing stock. And so we have to accept certain market realities and others that currently exist in the way that our housing market works and the way that all of these things are funded. And we have to design it so that all of us together can prosper. And you're right, you know, Zoran Mamdani, rent control in a lot of ways is the inverse of, you know, rent control, and rent price fixing specifically is the inverse of property tax abolishment, something I'm going to borrow there from Blake. And I think people who are conservative can rightfully ridicule that while not recognizing their own impetus to want that same thing when it benefits themselves.
Yeah, all right, 20 seconds. Give us your coordinates. How do people follow you, track you, listen to your show, all the things?
Breaking Points on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, eSauger on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you can find me on social media. Thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate it.
I want to emphasize, because it created such a passionate reaction, we are not pursuing generational warfare. We're not attacking anyone who owns a home, anyone who's retired. We are reminding people we are all in a country, and we have people who have the biggest problems, which are young people, and this would ignite generational warfare to pursue this. And I think we shouldn't do that, and I think Charlie would tell us not to do that.
You are, of course, running for governor of the great state of Florida, and just before you joined, we had Sagar and Jetty talking about an issue that's germane to Florida. Obviously, the conversation about property taxes. Now, I want to brief you, because you probably missed it. Blake is anti getting rid of them. I am much more sympathetic, because there's a part of me that's kind of like,
our viewers are very in favor of getting rid of it. Yeah. It's me against the tidal wave on this one.
Right. So Blake thinks it's a sort of boomer populism or something. Maybe not. That's a blunt way to say it.
I think I don't want to because people are getting so mad. I don't want to emphasize it necessarily helping the older people. I want to emphasize, I think it's bad for younger people.
All right, so that
Maybe
so,
that's a more winning way. I don't know.
But I think of it as like, listen, you work your whole life, you buy a piece of property, but you never really own it. You're just constantly renting it from the government. That's my instinct. It's like, I want to work my whole life and own something. Now, where do you fall on this issue, Congressman?
Well, actually, my view is, one, we should eliminate homestead property taxes. I agree with Governor DeSantis. I do agree with the philosophical point that you shouldn't have to essentially have to pay a lease or a fee to the government for you to be able to keep your property. And I do fundamentally agree with that from a philosophical standpoint. I think in terms of where we are in Florida, look, I think we're going to go down the line of repealing homestead property taxes. The governor is adamant about this. I think what we need to see now is the governor's full plan. I know he's working on that now. I think his full plan being given to the people of Florida is going to be critical for this to go from something that is an idea, something that should be accomplished, to actually being implemented. Because we're going to have to go through a couple of things. How are we going to fund sheriffs and sheriff deputies and police officers? How are we going to pay firefighters, road construction, road maintenance? These are the things that local governments do pay for. So how are we going to make sure those things don't get disturbed? That's number one. And we go from there. So I support it. I do support repealing homestead property taxes. I agree that people should not have to pay a fee to the government just for the privilege of being able to keep their home. But there are key services that local governments provide. We want to make sure that that funding is there.
Yeah, my take is if there's a smart way to do it where you're not hollowing out your education system, your fire department, and not shift the tax burden to younger families that are trying to get started. I mean, that's one of the benefits of Florida. You can start a family there. You can believe that the public school system is going to not be indoctrinating your kid. I mean, that's the appeal, right? If you want to start a family, states like Texas and Florida are the places you want to go. So,
well, real quick.
Yeah.
Real quick. And I think this is important because we want to talk about young people. The reason why I think a repeal of homestead property taxes helps first-time home buyers is because when you go to buy a home, you're not just paying the sticker costs. You also have to pay the closing costs associated with buying it. When you go through closing on a piece of property, especially on a home, you have to pay up front a year's worth of property taxes. And so depending on what you're buying, that's several $1,000s. So it actually, in my opinion, helps young people acquire that first home because it decreases decreases closing costs because you're not having to escrow taxes for acquiring the property. So that's where I think that a repeal of property taxes for homesteaded property does actually help young people get into the game of home ownership.
How about, I think something that there's more unity on is a way you can lower housing prices across the board is just build more houses overall.
Yes.
And Florida overall
100%.
has been good at that long term, but I know there are rising costs there now. So how about we look at what's the plan there? How do you make sure Florida's had a ton of people moving there? How do you make sure that they can be building houses both for the new arrivals and for the children of people who've been living there their whole lives?
Well, let me talk about Florida specifically. The first thing is we have to really streamline the permitting and planning processes in our state. Right now in Florida, if you're going to build a single family home, it takes anywhere from 18 months to 2.5 years of permitting before you can put a shovel in the ground. So you have just dead time in these projects. And this dead time where you're going through permitting is not free. That adds to the cost of constructing the home, and that's paid by the consumer. It also delays the ability to actually build housing at scale so that you see prices overall come down. One of the reasons why our property values increased so rapidly in Florida is because during COVID-19, when, by the way, Governor DeSantis did the best job in America of leading our state. He was the best. It wasn't close. But what happened is so many people chose Florida, but we didn't have the housing stock to meet the demand. So prices went up. And so it's supply and demand like how it works anywhere else. So what we do have to do is build the necessary housing as efficiently as possible so you have more housing stock on the market. That stabilizes housing prices. It could even reduce it in some areas. And that's another way to open up home ownership for young people. On Capitol Hill, we got to get rid of these stupid regulations around housing and also these dumb regulations around procurement. procuring raw materials, because that increases the material costs that goes directly into construction, which goes directly into the cost of the home. And some of the Green New Deal weatherization stuff on homes that has made home construction more expensive, it's a problem too.